Well, hey there, Ruckus Makers. Today I am joined by Stanley S. Litow, who's a professor of the practice at Duke University, where he also served as Innovator in Residence and also teaches at Columbia University. Stan previously served as Deputy Chancellor of Schools for New York City and as President of the IBM Foundation and Vice President of Corporate Citizenship and Corporate Affairs at IBM. At IBM, he helped create Pathways in Technology Early College High School, PTECH, the innovative grade 9 to 14 school connecting school to college to career. He is also co-author of Breaking Barriers, How PTECH Schools Create a Pathway from High School to College to Career from Teachers College Press. Stan also serves as a trustee of the State University of New York, where he chairs the Academic Affairs Committee. Stan, welcome to the show.
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
This is my pleasure. Believe me, when I've been digging into your work and during our pre-chat, this is really a cool experience for us. I'd love for us to start, Stan, if you could bring us to the moment where you actually gathered, from what I understand, all the governors across the United States to get them in the same room to talk about education. So how did you pull that off, and what was the topic that you discussed?
Yes, this was back in 1996, and the CEO of the IBM company, Lou Gerstner, was extremely interested in education and education reform. And he was asked me, because I was working for him, he had hired me to run the IBM Foundation and be in charge of corporate citizenship for the company. How could you possibly get the interest of the governors in an education reform agenda? I said, well, get on the agenda the National Governors Association, outline the challenge that you'd like to make, invite them to spend 24 hours, host them at IBM. And my guess is if there's enough interest, we'll get at least half of the governors who would agree to participate. So he got on the agenda. He outlined the fact that, education needed to improve. He thought at that point standards were one important part of the agenda to raise the bar, to increase the level of student achievement, and invited the CEOs of their state, the governors, to come to IBM, bring a CEO and an education leader with you for a 24-hour period. And actually 47 of the 50 governors wound up showing up, and we spent 24 hours trying to get consensus on the fact that they supported the concept of higher education standards and a collaboration across the states. So that was how it happened. And by the way, we also invited President Clinton, who also showed up.
So talk to me about dreaming that big, right? Because again, 47 of the 50 governors and President Clinton there, I don't even know how to approach something like that.
Well, I think it starts with the fact that education is an issue that ought to unite. I mean, I think we're living in an age right now where it's become very divisive. But when you think about the quality of education, it basically connects to every issue that it directly connects to economic growth, because students who graduate with a post-secondary degree and go into the workforce over their lifetime earn 84% more than those with only a high school diploma. So what does that mean? It means more tax revenue. It means more highly skilled and qualified workers. So it benefits the bottom line for all Americans. It benefits profitability for all the businesses. It benefits government because it reduces the amount of money that you have to spend on social safety net kinds of programs. So education ought to unite everyone. It's not an issue that should divide people. It's an issue that should unite people. And while education is the responsibility of educators, it's actually all of our responsibility. Business leaders, civic leaders, all have a responsibility to invest in and be a partner in the effort to improve education. And when we see our education results slipping as they have, especially for low-income students, students of color, it is something that creates an economic divide that is not good for our nation.
Right. Well, I find it inspiring, that vision that you cast and the fact that it is a unifying message. It's all hands on deck. We all have a responsibility there. Plus, I really appreciate just saying that it's essentially a win-win-win scenario that you were talking about, right? For the students, for businesses, for the government. Like, that's an exceptional way to frame it. From what I understand, when you had the governors in the room, you challenged them, you gave them 24 hours to respond to the challenge. And can you talk about like how long it took for them to respond and what your results were?
I would say that we walked out in 24 hours with a common agreement to a common statement. There were 6 CEOs and 6 governors who were the conveners of this effort. And while we were meeting and after and during breaks, we drafted that agreement. People signed on to it. And then we walked out of the meeting 24 hours later with a common agreement. And the common agreement was that we needed to have higher education standards. There needed to be some consistency across the states. And business leaders, governors, education leaders all came to agreement before we walked out about the consensus about not just what to do, but how to do it. And in the room, you had the major teacher union leader, you had CEOs from every state, as I said, you had Republican governors, Democrat governors, President of the United States, and everybody was able to get agreement about a common next step.
Maybe you need to run for president next then. That sounds great, bringing everybody together. Tell me, Stan, how is your PTECH model an example of innovation in high school and college?
Well, not many people know this, but it wasn't until the end of the Second World War that high school was really made mandatory. Before that point, it was a K-8 school system in most states in the United States. And then as we moved out of the Second World War in the United States, high school became mandatory as part of a K-12 education system. And with more young people getting a high school degree and getting a high school education, in large measure, it fueled economic growth across the country. And in 2010, when we came up with the idea for PTECH, there were a number of concurrent crises that were taking place. Number one, the jobs that were being created that had middle income wages and higher required a post-secondary degree. While high school graduation rates had increased in virtually every state, college completion rates, especially for low-income young people and young people of color, had basically stagnated. So while low-wage jobs required a high school diploma or less, high-wage jobs required a post-secondary degree, the concept of a high school diploma did not equate to college readiness. So we had a confluence of crises situation. So the suggestion was, what could you come up with that would address this challenge and do things differently? And the idea was to change the model from grade 9 to 12 to grade 9 through 14, so that students would come in at grade 9, they would receive a high school diploma and a 2-year associate's degree for free. It would be an associate's degree that would be linked directly to high-wage jobs, either computer science, electromechanical engineering, healthcare, you name it, cybersecurity. And the business collaborator or partner would promise mentors, paid internships, structured workplace visits, and then a guarantee that students who successfully completed would be first in line for jobs. The college collaborator or partner would pledge that as soon as students were college ready, they could take their college credit-bearing courses as early as the summer between grade 9 and 10. And the curriculum for grade 9 and 10 would be matched up. So it would be a scope and sequence of classes and courses directly connected to a college degree. And that would be the model that would be designed to significantly increase completion rates, and that entry into the program would not have a screen for admission. And that would mean that all students would be let in. No exam to get in, no review of your grades based upon grade 8. But given this opportunity and given these supports, the concept was that significantly larger numbers of students would complete.
Opening the doors for more kids is what I'm hearing, and removing the friction, the obstacles that potentially could be in their way. And then talk about an authentic and relevant experience that now instead of 9 through 12, it's through 14. They get that 2-year degree. And like you said, in access to a nicely paying job, like right out of the gate. What an absolute gift, which is probably why right after 10 years of PTECH putting this program through, it's my understanding it's in 266 schools worldwide. And I just want to ask Stan, like, how does that feel? And you talked a bit about the secret to PTECH success, but is there anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I think what to add to it is that there are lots of examples of single school successes. And that's why I believe that the strategy for bringing it to scale and making it sustainable has to begin on day one. Many of the reforms in education, a lot of people believe, well, if you created a model school and you did things innovative and different, and it was successful, organically, it would just grow. But when we look back over the last 50 or 60 years, there's no examples of that. Because there are, and you could go to every city in the United States, you could go to every state in the United States, and somebody could take you to a high functioning school, whether it's an elementary, middle, or high school, and then it doesn't organically go to scale. So the strategy to innovate and then bring the innovation to scale has to be a conscious strategy. So even before the first door opened on Albany Avenue in a low-income neighborhood in Brooklyn to a population of 100% students of color in 2011 with the first PTECH school, there was a conscious strategy to replicate this model. Number one, open door. Any student can get in. Why is that significant and important? Because if you screened for admission, people would say, well, of course it was successful. You cherry picked the right students, and it can't work unless you do that. Number two, keep an open door for all the key stakeholders. Involve teachers, parents, community organizations, and others. Don't leave people out, because if they're left out, then they will be opposition to it when you're trying to bring it to scale. While it may seem very seductive to raise private money and spend a lot more money, don't do that, because then it will not go to scale, because people will say, well, there's not enough money to do this for all schools. So the PTECH example opened its doors, and almost immediately, based upon initial success, it was growing across cities and states across the United States, and then countries outside the United States. As you pointed out, 10 years later, 28 countries have PTECH schools. When President Obama visited the first PTECH school in Brooklyn, he said he visited the classrooms and he got into the auditorium gym and spoke to all the students and said, this is an opportunity that should be given to every student in America. He featured it in his State of the Union address. And just this year, President Macron of France said virtually the same thing. This is an opportunity that should be given to every student in France. And that's why just recently they made a commitment to open 100 new PTECH schools in France. So it is an opportunity that should be accorded for larger and larger numbers of young people.
Wow. Well, you know, our thing here at Better Leaders, Better Schools is about what I call making a ruckus in education, and that's innovating, right? And making positive change. And I just want to honor you because you're obviously doing that, you know, and the fact that you didn't cherry pick students. You know, you thought through some of the challenges and objections people may have, that everybody had a voice at the table, and that you're operating within the constraints of bureaucracy and budget, so that people, oh, they had more money or whatever. Like, I really appreciate that. And the last thing I want to highlight for those on the call now and those listening to the podcast later is just the intentionality that this idea we want to scale. So you don't just hope that it scales, or pray that organically it gets picked up, but you design that in the strategy. And I heard that come through quite nicely with what you shared. So thank you for all of that, Stan. We're going to pause here just for a quick message from our sponsors. When we get back, though, I would love to ask you about Oscar.
Great.
Learn how to successfully navigate change, shape your school's success, and lead your teams with Harvard's certificate in school management and leadership. Get world-class Harvard faculty research specifically adapted for pre-K-12 schools. Self-paced online professional development that fits your schedule. Apply now at betterleadersbetterschools.com/Harvard. The BLBS podcast is brought to you by TeachFX. Research shows that the more students speak in class, the more they learn, and the better they perform on standardized tests. TeachFX has helped hundreds of schools increase their student engagement by visualizing for teachers what portions of class are teacher talk versus student talk. Get a 20% discount on TeachFX by using a special code just for the Ruckus Maker Nation. That's at teachfx.com/BLBS. And our final sponsor is Organized Binder, a program which gives students daily exposure to goal setting, reflective learning, time and task management, study strategies, organizational skills, and more. Organized Binder's color-coded system is implemented by the teacher through a parallel process with students, helping them create a predictable and dependable classroom routine. You can learn more and improve your students' executive functioning and non-cognitive skills at organizedbinder.com. And we are back with Stan Litow, professor over at Duke, the founder of this amazing idea called PTECH Schools, which is what we were just digging into. And before the break, I said I'd love to hear Oscar's story. So can you share that with us?
Absolutely. When the program began, the idea, and we talked about this earlier, was that any student could be admitted, no matter how far behind they were in grade 8, no matter what their issues were. And one example in the Brooklyn school, Oscar Tindilla. Oscar was more than 3 years behind in both reading and math in grade 8, barely thought he could finish high school. But given the opportunity that we talked about, given a mentor, given the opportunity for paid internships, given the idea of structured workplace visits to actually work with people as part of your education experience, learn the workplace skills that were important, almost immediately getting into grade 9, Oscar starts achieving at rates that nobody would have expected he could achieve at. And then he winds up completing the 6-year program in 3.5 years, not 6. Gets a full scholarship to Cornell. And just this past June, graduated with his bachelor's degree from Cornell. And by the way, Oscar wants to be an education reformer. And the fact that he was a son of an immigrant, the fact that English was not his primary language, the fact that he was far behind in grade 8 was not a barrier. PTECH broke that barrier for Oscar. And in my book, Breaking Barriers, I tell Oscar's story because I think for some people, when you talk about policy change and innovation in education, it really comes home when you tell the story of individual students. So when you say it's an open door, and no matter how far behind a student was in grade 8, they can achieve. But then when you embrace Oscar's story, it puts a face on it, a name on it, and people understand it. Now, it's interesting because Oscar completed the school in Brooklyn, New York, but another young man, Jose, went to the school in Longmont, Colorado. Jose also began, he came to Colorado at age 9, not speaking a word of English, from Mexico, gets into the program also behind. And Oscar graduated in 3.5 years. Jose graduated in 4 years. And he graduated with his college degree, high school diploma, and a full scholarship, not to Cornell, but to Harvard. And Jose will go to Harvard next year. So the lesson is, it's not one geography. It could be any state. It could be an Oscar. It could be a Jose. All of the assumptions about who can achieve go out the window if you provide students with the right opportunity.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Well, it sounds like you've perfected a formula that set up the conditions where kids can really soar, and so whether it's Oscar, whether it's Jose, and the fact that from what I heard, so not only authentic and relevant in terms of the school experience, it's personalized. So if they're ready to take these college classes or whatever, they had the opportunity to, which is why I assume Oscar or Jose were able to compact their experience from what should have been 6 years to 4 or to 3.5. Am I following that
Correct.
correctly? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. The students proceed at their own pace. The minute that they determine college readiness, they take usually an exam like the AccuPlacer or something like that, whatever exam the school district or the state uses to determine college readiness. And then the student can, through a dual enrollment model, high school classes and college classes together, proceed at whatever pace they need to proceed at to get their high school diploma and their community college degree. And then once both are in hand, then the student can take a job from an IBM or a Thomson Reuters or a Tesla or a Corning or any company that is the partner, and there are hundreds of them serving as collaborative partners with these PTECH schools. And they can go into the workplace at an average starting salary north of $50,000 a year. Or they can go on and get their 4-year degree, as Oscar did, or as many others did. Or they can get their 4-year degree while they're working, as lots of other young people did. Radcliffe Sadler, the young man who introduced President Obama when he came to the Brooklyn School, completed his bachelor's degree while working. And then they can go on, if they choose, to get a graduate degree, as many students do. Shudan Brown, a young African-American woman in Brooklyn, is now pursuing her PhD in computer science while working at IBM. So all of these stories, whether it's Radcliffe, Shudan, Jose, Oscar, you name it, they're examples that blow away all the myths of who can succeed. Now, the other thing that's important is not one of these students has had to take remedial courses. Now, that's interesting because last year, virtually 70% of the students who graduate with a high school diploma who are low income and students of color wind up taking non-credit bearing remedial courses that last year cost about $12 billion. So while the students get this opportunity, and it doesn't cost more than any other school other than their college tuition cost, they wind up saving a huge amount of money. They wind up getting a college degree and going into the workplace, earning more, paying higher taxes. So this is not just win-win, it's win-win-win-win.
Yeah, it's the win trifecta times a gazillion. So this is fantastic. I can't encourage, the Ruckus Maker community to pick up Breaking Barriers enough. We'll have that linked up for you in the show notes. So you definitely want to check that work out. Stan, I love to ask my guests the same 2 questions at the end of a show. And so the first one is, if you could put a message on all school marquees around the world for just a day, what would your message read?
My message would be every student can succeed. There needs to be a culture in the building that says every student can succeed. Don't make a judgment based upon a student's race, ethnicity, zip code, etc., about who can succeed. The first principal of the PTECH school in Brooklyn, Rashid Davis, Rashid had a commitment that he wanted every teacher in the school to just believe that every student will succeed. Now, will 100% of the students succeed? No, even though the college completion rates at PTECH are 400% higher than the national average. That doesn't mean that every student will succeed, but believe every student will succeed. One of the things that Principal Davis did in the Brooklyn PTECH school is that the minute that a student passed their test to be college ready, he put their picture up on the wall and said under their name, college ready. So as you walk through the hall, you see your picture, you see your friends' pictures, and the culture embedded in every class by every teacher is, if you work hard, you can succeed, and we will help you succeed. And that culture supports the excellence that we want for all of our students.
Yeah, I mean, again, so inspirational. I can't imagine seeing your face there, college ready. Like, if that isn't exciting to you as an educator, I don't know what's going to excite you. So, very cool. Stan, if you could, well, you did this, but I'm still going to ask. You're building a school from the ground up. You're not limited by any resources. Your only limitation is your imagination. So maybe I should say, how did you build your dream school? And what were your top 3 priorities?
Well, the top priority was to take down the silo between school to college to career. Because what we found was school, high school in this case, ended and students were sent off, and many of them were not ready and many of them didn't prepare well enough to be able to be college ready. The high school diploma did not equate to college ready. So combine and take down the door and the silo between high school and college. Make it a concurrent experience. When students begin their PTECH experience in grade 9, the principal gets up and says, "You're in college. You're in college. You are not only in high school, you're in high school and college together." And then integrating career through the mentoring and the structured workplace visits and the paid internships, very important, a really opportunity to understand, why am I learning how to problem solve? Why am I learning how to write? Why am I learning how to present? Because these are skills that will differentiate me in my career. So take down the silo between school to college to career. Give the supports all the way along the way. And then school will be relevant, college will be significant, and a career opportunity will be not just possible, but something that can be easily realized. And that is, in my view, what we were trying to accomplish with PTECH. And whether you attend the PTECH school in Newburgh, New York, or Norwalk, Connecticut, or Baltimore, Maryland, or Longmont, Colorado, or France, or Japan, or Taiwan, wherever it is, those common elements go across every geography. So there's actually no barrier to going from 266 schools to 366, 566, 966. We can do what President Macron of France or President Obama in the United States said. We can make this opportunity available to any student.
Brilliant. Well, Stan, thank you so much for being my guest here on the Better Leaders, Better Schools podcast. Of all the things we talked about today, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
I want people to remember that education is connected to our stable opportunity and a real economic future for all Americans. If we got behind PTECH and those college completion rates, 400% higher than the national average, were generalizable across the United States, we would create economic value that the nation would be able to live wealthy and healthy on for decades and decades to come. This is not a responsibility of teachers or principals alone. This is not the responsibility of parents alone. This is all of our responsibility. And we can, in fact, make it happen. And we can end the economic divide, we can end the cultural divide, and we can provide real opportunity for all.
Doors and removing silos, breaking barriers. You talked about Oscar's story where he discussed that PTECH kind of broke down some of those barriers so that his full potential could shine through. As we make our way through, this pandemic that keeps on throwing barriers to schools, what are some of those current barriers that exist that are worth aiming at, and what can school leaders do to help break down those barriers?
Well, number one is, fortunately, in the United States, our schools got a lot of money from the federal government in the stimulus package, and there'll be some kind of a reconciliation package as well. And money will not any longer be the challenge or the problem in the short term. And then the question is to think clearly about how to spend those resources in the short term, because what the pandemic has caused is an escalation of the learning gap between high achieving and low achieving young people. We're seeing students falling dramatically behind. When the doors open for a lot of students who are beginning grade 2, they'd never been to school. Their social skills, their educational skills were way behind. And students at a variety of different levels were far behind. So we need to spend that money to offer young people an extended school day. We need to use that money to hire college students to mentor and support students in high schools and middle schools. We need to get right busy now to stop the learning gap that COVID has created. That's number one. Number two, we're finding a problem with hiring teachers. There are fewer people who want to go into teaching, and there are fewer people who want to stay in teaching. So we've got to think about how we spend our incentives to reward more teachers, to provide higher professional development for teachers, to improve their skills. So there are a lot of things that we're going to have to do to make up the learning gap that COVID has created. Now, when I was doing interviews for the book, I talked to a number of principals in PTECH schools who said the PTECH students, because they had mentors, because they had devices, because they had Wi-Fi, they were participating in instruction at higher rates than students who did not have that access. So when we suspended in-person instruction and we believed that remote learning was an alternative to in-person learning, the results are now demonstrating it's not equated to in-person learning. But just because we're in person, that doesn't mean remote learning needs to end. Now, remote learning can be an add-on to in-person instruction so that students can get added support for a longer day or perhaps on the weekend or other time periods. And we can use the money that was appropriated to be able to provide more technology access, more Wi-Fi, more mentoring for students, for teachers, for parents, to be able to help them to achieve and get rid of this learning gap that COVID has created.
I think I'll read Rosemary's question, and then Jesse, if you want to read Kristen's after that. So Stan, Rosemary asks, how do you think the PTECH model can be used for all content areas and disciplines?
I think it doesn't have a specific content area or discipline. It should have a strong academic program. Students should take math, science, English, history. The way that the course is taught should include general and available workplace skills. This isn't your grandfather's voc ed. This is a strong academic program. Another young man who went to the PTECH school in Brooklyn, Morsaleen Mozahid, he graduated with his associate's degree. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in biology, and he's going to medical school. So there was nothing in the program that limited Morsalin's ability to do anything or be anything. The workplace skills, this is not a vocational skill. It's a skill like problem solving. When President Obama visited the algebra class at the PTECH school in Brooklyn, he saw students working and using their algebra skill to solve a problem. The challenge, and the students were working in teams of 4, was you're going to be going in competition with Nike and developing a new sneaker, but you need to develop a business plan. And here's how you use your algebra skills to develop a business plan. And then you better learn how to write up your business plan. And they were writing their business plans and posting it on the wall. And then they were told that the next stage is you're going to be going in front of a potential investor. So you have to present your business plan. So A, they needed to learn algebra skills. B, they needed to learn writing skills, problem solving skills, presentation skills. And those skills were part of every class, not just algebra. I remember taking the president of Johns Hopkins University into that math class, and we walked out into the hallway after the class. He said, I've never seen a math class like that. That was amazing. The kids were so engaged. And that was what the workplace skills were there for, not to restrict opportunity for a student, but to expand it.
Well, again, in an integrated approach, is what I'm hearing, relevant. So yeah, that sounds fabulous. My wife worked at Hopkins for a while too, so just a personal connection.
Great.
Jesse, did you want to read Kristen's question?
Sure. This is a good one. All right. If you were going to have the governors meet again in 2022, what would be on that agenda, and how would the conversation differ from the one in 1996, especially with such division in education right now?
I would try to unite people on improving our college completion rates. College, some people have been, just saying college isn't necessary. College isn't all that important. You can just have a short-term micro-credential in some area. That's not true. College is not only important, college is necessary. And we need to invest in giving people the kind of skills. One of the things that I wrote about in my last book was an experience at AT&T. They had 100,000 employees who were skilled in working at hardware that was in the field for AT&T hardware. And that hardware was going away, and it was all in the cloud. And now they needed to have software skills. And if they didn't have those skills, they were going to be out of a job. So AT&T invested $250 million to reskill those 100,000 employees so that they would be able to take the new jobs that were available at AT&T. Well, we don't need to wait for jobs to go out of business. We need to build the problem solving and the capacity building skills for our young people so that they can take advantage of labor market opportunity in a whole host of areas. The PTECH school in Newburgh, New York offers a degree in cybersecurity. The average starting salary for those jobs is north of $50,000 a year. It's closer to $60,000 a year. And last year at the community college, State University of New York in Orange County, 2/3 of the college graduate came out of that one little PTECH high school. So the governors, mayors, legislators, business leaders need to understand that college completion is possible if we make the right investments. And PTECH provides a clear guideline on how we can break those barriers and make this opportunity real for all students.
Let me take myself off mute. I was saying brilliant. Stan, thanks again for being such a wonderful guest. He's a co-author of a book called Breaking Barriers, and we'll have that linked up in the show notes if people want to check that out. Also, if you're going to buy a second book, just shameless plug for myself. My book came out last Friday. And so please check out the Mastermind book, which would be fantastic. And to our live audience that showed up and the listeners in the future, just thanks for making a ruckus. Really appreciate you all.